share his book, Mr. John. No, this is Anthony
Anthony
Valero.
Valero.
And he's written a book about John Dante's Inferno, and he is, and in it he talks about his experiences. Now it has an era of time that his experiences, and he shares them with them validly in the picture of John Dante in the book. Anthony, please share, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And also thank Elizabeth Clare for the power to have me on today. The themes on this roundtable is men empowerment, male empowerment, if you will. And I'd like to talk a bit about that empowerment and also friendship. The name of the book in question is John Dante's Inferno, A Playboy's Life. And I'd like to say, people inquiring, it's available, Amazon and other retailers and on my website, information about it, anthonyvalerio.com, just to say that. Um, I'm an author of 12 books of fiction and nonfiction, and I was also trained as a professional book editor. And those two trainings coalesced to a writing career later on, which I've been fortunate to be able to do. Now, this book, in brief, John Dante's Inferno, Playboy's Life, is really, for me, a story of immigration. The power of the United States in the 30s and 40s is attracting immigrants to this country. John Dante, the subject of this book, was an Italian from southern Italy. He migrated with his teenage mother to Chicago when he was 2 years old and she was 16. He grew up in Chicago and became, in time, second in command in the Playboy empire under Hugh Hefner. Now, I would not have been interested in writing about all this, but I was very good friends with Shel Silverstein, the famous children's book writer. I worked with Shel. I edited one of his books called Three Eyes, about a man, or actually a man with a third eye in the middle of his head. So Shel was very interesting and very funny man. What's really not very well known is Shel Silverstein lived in the Playboy Mansion from the time he was around, starting his career, which was at Playboy as an illustrator and writer, until his last day. Now, Shel asked me to write a book about his friend John. I said, no, I don't do things like that. He kept asking me, and I've always wondered what a famous man, wealthy man, would have such a stake in having a book about the insider's view of Playboy to be successful. In time, I acquiesced to that because he was the kind of friend I couldn't say no to. So we have here power and we have here friendship. Now, then he said, well, go down and visit John. He's living in a hellhole in Fort Lauderdale. Now, hell. John Dante took the name of Dante, the famous Italian poet, because he was infatuated with Gustave Doré's photographs of Dante's hell. I was interested in this project because the mirror narrative of Dante's hell, where we all, in order to get to paradise, in order to get to our love, the muse Beatrice, in order to sit at the right hand of God, we have to go through hell and we have to go through purgatory. And that's what attracted me to this. Now, briefly saying, John Dante gets the job as a bartender at the first Playboy Club. He rises in power and becomes Hugh Hefner's assistant. Now, the power of all this is this. Hugh Hefner, John Dante, Shel Silverstein had the power to hire women to work in the empire. Yes, they dressed as bunnies. It was terrible. Understand all the feminists. Just to say also, after the book came out, the women who worked in that empire who contacted me had nothing negative to say about John or Shel, nothing at all. In fact, it was quite the opposite. So that's the story of John's life going from the beginning to the end, which didn't end very well with him. Now, I'd like to say also that I recorded last year, took the opportunity, requested to record this book. So it's an Audible original. It's available on Audible and on ACX. Now, as far as power is concerned, the keynote, one of the main ideas I derived from working with Shell and men in such power is that they would never take advantage of someone, especially a woman, in a lesser position than they were. That was a no-no. I always felt that way too, that men are also often in positions to take advantage of their power. Professors, authors have their groupies, if you will. And maybe thinking of these terms, others, others can come up with the dynamic of men and power to taking advantage of women. Some do. I learned, or they told me directly when I was working on this, working with Shell and John, who then passed away, and then Shell passed away, and so I had the book published as a gift to them, to my friends. The whole project really was a gift of friendship, and also to illustrate a period of time that's a very important period in American history, the Playboy Empire in the late 50s through the 90s. So that's pretty much what it was, and frankly, what it is. Hugh Hefner himself, who I never met, but he knew what I was doing. In fact, and also had a photograph of mine in the mansion. Was a man who, among other things said about him, was a great friend. He hired people in his clubs, like the first, Lenny Bruce, Bill Cosby, you know, young entrepreneurs and talents who later became very famous men who we all know about. That was the power Hugh Hefner had in that position. So that's what it is. Now, just to finish, I don't want to, I'm sorry I took up time, the others that preceded me. Through all this project, writing this project, I wondered what stake Shel Silverstein had, like I said earlier, that his friend write a successful book. And here's what I came up with. I never asked him directly, but here's what I came up with. As a young, you might, well, most of you, I hope you might know, Shel Silverstein is one of the most successful books of children's books in all of literature worldwide. I mean, his books sold in the top 10 in the 20th century. I mean, and I'm talking about the Bible and books like that. So I wondered, because he really, really wanted me to do this, and I didn't want to. As a young man, Shel Silverstein wrote, he was not popular with the girls. He couldn't dance, he said, and so he worked. And then, later on when he was famous, he was still working. And I happen to have known, his lady friends and so forth, his son and so forth.
All right.
And,
sorry, I have to interrupt.
okay.
But we'll bring you back. We'll bring you
Okay.
back. But thank you, Anthony. And Anthony's website, can you check? Can you put it in the chat, your website?
Sure,
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
if you
thank
want
you.
his book, The Playboy Inferno, it's a really good book. And if you want to understand men and how but Anthony has written a lot of great books, and they're all on his website. There's one that in particular about a physician who talks about washing hands back in the 18th century, and we want to bring him back for our women's event to talk about that book. So Anthony, I will get back in touch with you and do a formal interview with you. But thank you for your
Thank you,
valuable
Claire.
time.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I
Thanks,
appreciate
everybody.
it. Appreciate it. Thanks so
Okay,
much.
so
All right.
we're going
Next
to
up-
part 2, and then Grover, Neil, Lester will bring you back. But right now I have to do my third series, which is my